The Death Bow and the Last Breath are two high-end dungeon bows, both providing their own unique and powerful abilities. For a while, the Last Breath was seen as the best dungeon bow in the game, and also one of the best out-of-dungeon bows, but the introduction of Floor 7 was soon to change this, bringing along the Death Bow. A lot of different information regarding both weapons has been floating around in the community, so I felt as if it would be appropriate to put them up against each other to properly test them and see which one is the better option. But before we get to the results, if you have any further questions or comments about this video, feel free to pop into my Twitch streams. I stream every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The links are down in the description below. With all of that out of the way, let's get right into the video. Okay, so as you can see, today's video is going to be covering the two bows that I have in my inventory here, the Last Breath and also the Death Bow. Now, both dungeon weapons that I have here in my inventory have been really good for a long period of time and have been known to be some of the best bows in the game. Even though archers are mainly supposed to use boomerangs, they still are able to use these bows in some situations, and there is still some value that is provided by these weapons, which I will cover in today's video. So before we get into the hefty damage test that I will be covering later on in the video and showing you guys all the nitty-gritty details about these weapons, I'm just going to cover the basic stats of both of these bows, and that's a very easy thing to do so you guys have an idea of what we're working with. But looking at the Last Breath here, you can see that I actually have a fragged one. I have used livid fragments to upgrade this up one tier, which means that this Last Breath is at the best that it could possibly be, excluding hot potato books and fuming hot potato books, and I've done the exact same thing on the Death Bow, no hot potato books or fumings, and we have the exact same enchants on both of them as well. Now, just covering over the stats that these weapons provide, the damage on the Last Breath is plus 190, and with the Spiritual Reforge, it gives you plus 218 strength, but it would usually also give you plus 190 strength without a Reforge. And then with the Spiritual Reforge, we are able to get plus 12% crit chance and then plus 55% crit damage. So overall, the stats look pretty good on this weapon. Now, if we compare it to the Death Bow here, you can see that the damage is significantly higher. We get plus 300 damage, except the bow does not come with any strength whatsoever, so the Spiritual Reforge ends up adding plus 20 strength onto that. And then as for the crit chance and crit damage, the same thing happens here. We get plus 10% crit chance from the Spiritual Reforge and also plus 37% crit damage from the Spiritual Reforge as well. So just to get a quick side-by-side comparison here, once again, we have plus 300 damage on the Death Bow, plus 190 on the Last Breath, but then we have only plus 20 strength on the Death Bow and plus 218 on the Last Breath. So damage-wise, these bows look pretty similar. The Death Bow is heavily focused on just damage alone and doesn't have any strength on the base stats at all, but both of them still look like they output a lot of damage, as the Last Breath is a more all-round weapon with a balanced amount of damage and strength, while the Death Bow just has a ridiculous amount of damage and no strength at all. Now, while both of these bows are unique in their own ways, the Death Bow focused on damage while the Last Breath focused on both of them equally. I just want to talk about the bonuses that these weapons come with. I'll first cover the Last Breath's bonus, which as you can see down the bottom there, it says reduces the defense of your target by 50 on hit. Stacks up to 2 times. This is actually a very useful bonus that the bow comes with. Now, a lot of people actually use this on Necron in the boss fight, because if you're able to tap Necron twice with your last bow, you end up reducing his defense from 300 to 200, and if you get 2 other players on your team to do the exact same thing, you basically end up taking out all of Necron's defense just with 6 Last Breath hits. In comparison, the Death Bow also has an ability down the bottom there where you deal 100% of damage to undead monsters, and your arrows also have a 50% chance to bounce to another target after you hit your original one. So Last Breath's bonus definitely seems a lot stronger than the Death Bow's one. The Death Bow is really good, as it does do a lot of damage to undead monsters, but you would think that weakening the defense of mobs is probably a lot stronger, especially with that technique that I was talking about against Necron. Now, we'll be covering the difference between both of these bonuses, when they're useful, when they're not, and how they compare against each other a little bit later on in this video. But for now, I'm going to move over to the damage comparison on the Crypt Ghouls, then we'll move over to a damage comparison on the Wolves, and I'll also roll some clips that I ended up getting when I was playing some dungeons where I showcased both of these weapons. So now that I've talked about both of these bows' basic stats and also their abilities that they come with, I think it's time for a quick damage comparison on these Crypt Ghouls over here. So I'll just start out by grabbing my Last Breath. We'll go with the Last Breath first up here to get some shots on these Crypt Ghouls. If I charge a full powered arrow at this Crypt Ghoul here, we'll do about 135,000 damage there. 135,000 damage on that Crypt Ghoul as well. 135 damage a third time. And then 136,000 damage on the 4th hit. Now if we move on to the death bow here to see the numbers on the death bow's damage, it should in theory be a lot stronger as it does do 100% of damage to undead monsters. So pulling a fully charged arrow on this critical here will do 497,000 damage. 497,000 damage again. 497,000 damage on the third hit. And then 497,000 damage on the fourth hit as well. So with the setup that I was using here, the enchants of the bows being the ones that I'll show just on the screen right here. You can pause this video if you need to. Also using a 3/4 Necron and Tarantula helmet setup, all ancient reforges. Using 6 legendary, 12 epic, 21 rare, 10 uncommon, and 11 common talismans that are mostly either shaded or forceful. Combat 31, foraging 31. You can see that for this damage test specifically, the death bow completely outclasses the last breath that I have in my inventory. Now this is expected as all the zombies down here in the crypts are actually undead mobs, as you would expect. And because the bow does 100% more damage to undead monsters, it only makes sense that it's going to completely outdamage the last breath in this situation, which is why I'm going to move over to the ruins now to show you guys the damage on the wolves. So moving on to the ruins now, if we continue our damage tests over here on these wolves, I'll start off with the last breath once again, having a fully powered shot on this wolf down here. We end up doing around 134,000 damage once again. 134,000 damage on the old wolf. 134,000 damage on that regular wolf. And then 134,000 damage once again. And now moving on to the death bow for a side-by-side comparison here. If I get a shot on this wolf right there, 123,000 damage. 123,000 damage again. 154,000, but my talisman did activate there. 123,000 damage on that wolf. And then 123,000 damage again using the death bow. So it's pretty evident that when you're not fighting undead mobs, the death bow is heavily outclassed by the last breath. It does deal around 10,000 damage less than the last breath does. However, the damage is nowhere near as drastic as the death bow has on the last breath when fighting undead mobs. So starting things off with the death bow, you can see how easily it clears out all of the mobs in this room at the start of the dungeon. Being able to deal around 9.4 million damage a shot with minimal blessings is outstanding, and the bounce shots from the bow also help out a lot as well. Moving on to the yellow room now, we're able to hit the Shadow Assassin with our ice spray, following up with the solid damage of the death bow. This time being able to deal around 450 to 500,000 damage a shot, we're able to easily clean up the mini-boss, especially because its defense is so low. Next up here we have the damage of the last breath right at the start of the dungeon, being able to deal around 2.5 to 3 million damage a shot, still really powerful but definitely not as significant as the death bow. This weapon isn't as optimally designed for room clearing like the death bow is, and it mostly shines against mini-bosses. And to accurately demonstrate this, it's clear that the last breath absolutely crushes mini-bosses, being able to two-shot these regular room lost adventurers. The last breath was only able to deal in between 300 to 350,000 damage a shot, but the defense weakening ability really kicks in to drastically speed up the kills. So as you guys can see, the comparison between both of these weapons still stays relatively similar both outside and inside of dungeons. The only real difference is how the last breath absolutely destroys mini-bosses when you just tap it a few times, as being able to lower the defense of those mini-bosses is incredibly important and you're able to completely shred their HP, while the death bow always maintained really high damage numbers on undead mobs and significantly outclasses the last breath when it came to room clearing. This ratio between damage did stay the same outside of dungeons when comparing both of these bows, except just on a much smaller scale where the damage difference wasn't as drastic when inside of dungeons. So already from all the testing I've done in today's video, you can clearly tell that both of these bows are great in sort of their own ways. The last breath is really good at taking higher health mobs, and also just wiping out mobs that aren't undead, while the death bow did a very good job at room clearing inside of dungeons, because most of the mobs in dungeons are all skeletons, zombies, and other undead mobs. But when it came to fighting mini-bosses, it definitely struggled a lot more. As a result, this makes the death bow a much more viable option if you have to take mobs out from a faraway distance, say when you're room clearing and you just want to be super cautious. But another instance that would really come in handy would be if you lost flight in the Necron boss fight, and you had to help your team out from a distance playing Archer, then you'd be able to shoot Necron from the outer platform, while he's doing his explosion attack in the center of the map. And because the death bow has incredibly high damage on undead monsters, this would make the death bow a lot more viable. But when it comes to most out-of-dungeon tasks, or when you want to take out mini-bosses, the Last Breath still comes in really handy to be able to weaken their defense. The Last Breath not only does more damage on mobs that aren't undead in compared to the Death Bow, but that reducing defense hit can also be really effective on Necron, as you're able to lower his defense by quite a fair bit. And because you can stack multiple Last Breaths from different players, you're able to all collectively do a lot of damage to Necron if you're able to weaken his defense that much. But the best thing about both of these weapons is that if you're able to use them in conjunction with one another, you're able to tap Necron twice with your Last Breath, weaken his defense, and then completely finish him off with the Death Bow. You're going to be doing an even higher amount of damage to Necron himself, as he's going to have a lot less defense than what he originally had, and the undead bonus is going to kick in quite a lot. Now, this is not realistic on regular mobs, this only works on the big tanky ones like Necron, who is an actual boss. But when it comes to outside of dungeons talk, the Last Breath is probably a little bit more practical in some situations. Namely on dragon fight, if you're going to be fighting a dragon with either one of these two bows, I would be picking the Last Breath because dragons aren't undead mobs. The Last Breath does more damage to the dragon, and you're also going to be weakening the dragon's defense, which is going to allow you to do even more damage on top of that. But it's also important to know that the Death Bow also has a use outside of dungeons as well. If I wanted to comfortably farm rev bosses in the crypts where I am right now, I can run around holding my Death Bow, just sort of bow spamming really short arrows, and as you can see, all the arrows home in, they all one shot, as I don't even have to pull the bow all the way back, and I'm able to clean out all those crypt ghouls in a matter of seconds, no problems at all, and it works really well as they're all undead mobs. Granted, you are able to do the exact same thing with the Last Breath, as the Last Breath is able to also run through these crypts here, do a lot of damage, as the arrows, when you don't pull them back all the way, still do enough damage to the zombies, but the Death Bow does it a lot more convincingly, so if you really wanted to, you should probably pick one up for that reason. But what the Last Breath can't do in this situation is actually take out a Golden Ghoul with those little weak shots. If I was to use these limp shots on the Golden Ghoul, I needed to shoot out 3 of them in order to take it out, but if I start to the Death Bow and I shoot 1 limp shot, it's just gonna one-shot it completely, as it does 63,000 damage, so the Death Bow is definitely more efficient at quickly farming revs, as you don't have to put any effort by shooting your arrows really weakly here, being able to take out all the mobs, and you don't have to struggle at all. So all in all, both of these bows have really nice perks in and out of dungeons in places where they suit each other well. Ideally, if you were able to pick up both of these, as they are pretty expensive, the Last Breath is about 7 million coins clean on the auction house, and the Death Bow is around 5 million coins from Ophelia, then being able to pair both of these weapons in dungeons will benefit you a drastic amount, and will definitely serve you better than only being able to pick up one of them. However, if you had to pick one or the other because you're on a tight budget and you don't want to be purchasing 2 bows, then it really all comes down to what you value more and what you're going to be doing more either in or out of dungeons, so you can purchase a bow that suits your needs best and use your money wisely. So for the Last Breath here, I would recommend this only if you're going to be focusing more outside of dungeons and not worrying too much about inside of dungeons. If you're not an archer class, or you don't really sweat dungeons too much, this bow will be much better for you. As a non-archer player, you still want to be able to have a Last Breath to try and weaken Necron as much as possible, but you aren't going to be finding yourself using this too much to actually fight mobs at all if you're going to be playing mage or something else. But having this bow in your possession to fight dragons, to fight other mobs, also clear out revs, to do other slayer mobs, it's going to be coming in very handy and overall has a lot of versatility. But if you are an archer class inside of dungeons and you plan on doing a lot more stuff within the dungeons themselves, the Death Bow is going to come in way more handy for you, as this does a significantly better job at clearing most mobs than the Last Breath does. Now ideally you would pick up a Death Bow and a Last Breath as an archer, as you should be able to weaken Necron and then pair it with a Death Bow, but if you just have the Death Bow alone and you lose flight, or you just want to help your team from a distance, this is going to come in a lot more handy, and also has some pretty good capabilities outside of dungeons too. It's just that the Last Breath does that a slight bit better. But with all of that being said, hopefully you all found this video informative or enjoyable in some way. If you did, be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing to my channel, as I make Hypixel Skyblock videos every Wednesdays and Fridays. And also just a quick reminder, if you've got any further questions, comments, or you just want to talk to me in a more private environment, feel free to visit me over on my Twitch streams. I stream every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The links are down in the description below. But with all that being said, that's going to be it for me today, guys. And as always, take care and peace. But it might be cool. Hello. Goodbye.